My name is Dave Fleming. I own a company called the Ingenuity Lab, which works with organizations around the country to help them facilitate creative solutions. And we're here to talk about some of that today, a really important issue. And before we get into that, Drew Bartlett, who's the Executive Director of the South Florida Water Management District, probably you know him, wanted to come first, welcome you, and just say a few words. Drew?
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to Collaboratory. Good way to spend a Friday afternoon. I believe happy hours right after we conclude. Is that right? Anyway, welcome. I'm very glad you're here and participating in this very important event. I'm Drew Bartlett, Executive Director. I've got two board members here, Chauncey Goss, who's the chairman, and Charlotte Roman, who is in the back. And so they've been incredible support for us as we move forward on all these important issues that we deal with.
It was like 48 hours after Governor DeSantis took office, he issued Executive Order 1912. And in that, he said, we're going to dedicate $2.5 billion to Everglades restoration, Caloosahatchee estuary restoration, St. Lucie estuary restoration, just everything that we need to do to take care of our water quality issues. And as part of that exact same executive order, he said, not only are we going to build the C-43 reservoir, but we're going to do something about the water quality that goes into that reservoir as well. And so he directed a feasibility study and to really understand how, if we're building the investment to take 140,000 acre feet of water, that's a lot of water, into a reservoir, let's do something about the quality of that water. Because we know the Caloosahatchee estuary needs water quality help, and the C-43 is this incredible investment and tool to actually get to that issue. And so we immediately launched this feasibility study, and I want to thank all the partners, and gosh, I'm not going to be able to remember them all. I remember meeting with Lee County and the city of Sanibel. I think there's Lee High Acres, Hendry County. I'm going to miss one, help me. And now I don't have my reading glasses. So
we're going to get there.
Cape Coral, thank you, and probably others. But we've got DEP here as well. As we stride out on a feasibility study, we don't want to do it in isolation. We want to do it as a community effort, and that's why it's important to have all those partners helping us look at this very important issue and collaborating at the Collaboratory while we look at those important issues. So I don't want to take you from this agenda any longer, turn it back over to you, but thank you very much for coming, and let's get to work.
Fantastic. Okay, well, again, yes, please, give him a hand. As Drew said, we're here as a community to talk about issues that matter to us, issues about the water quality study, but also we thought it might be good, just maybe many of you are very familiar with these issues in South Florida, but maybe some aren't. So we thought we'd start just by zooming out a bit and putting the study in context so that we really get a sense of sort of like the mall map, you are here and you've got the other pieces of what's going on to really restore the Everglades and the work that's being done there. And I'm joined by the project leader for this study, Georgia Vince, and she's going to just share a little bit just to put this study in perspective. And so Georgia, maybe, you've been a Floridian a long time, you work in this region and in this world. Tell us a little bit about the larger restoration work of the Everglades and what's the goal of it? What are we trying to do?
Right. Thanks, Dave. So as you said, my name's Georgia Vince. I work for Tetra Tech, and we are part of a joint venture with Jacobs Engineering that will be leading this study. So you'll see the name JTech in some of our slides today, and that's our little acronym for our joint venture. And between Jacobs Engineering and Tetra Tech, we have been working on Everglades restoration as staff to the district, as staff at the district. And so we really have been working on this Everglades restoration project for a long time. However, there are probably people in the room that have also been working, if not as longer than myself and my team. So I'm sure you guys have seen at least some version of this slide throughout presentations if you're involved at all with water issues in South Florida. As you know, the historic flow of the Everglades Started in central Florida, flows through Lake Okeechobee and south to the greater Everglades to Florida Bay. Historically, it was 9 million acres of lakes, rivers, and wetlands. In order for us to survive and maybe not deal with so many mosquitoes, we have historically drained and ditched Central and South Florida to a pretty extreme level. And so we have redirected flows east and west to the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie estuary and helped drain the agricultural areas so that we can control water levels throughout the region. And so in order to fix the issues over time, we've recognized that the ecosystems, including the northern estuaries, have been heavily affected by these changes to hydrology. The state and the federal government and all the local governments have been involved in different levels of Everglades restoration. And we started with a big project called the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which was authorized in 2000. And that actually included the C43 reservoir as one of the 65 or so components that were going to be constructed to solve the problem.
All of these pieces are to get us more to the right-hand side.
Yeah, the intent of all of Comprehensive Everglades Restoration is to get the flows back to the more natural condition, talking about quantity and water quantity flows and quality. And so the Water Management District and the federal government have been in a partnership for a long time to work towards this goal. In 2016, they passed the Central Everglades Planning Project, and then in 2018, the district developed the post-authorization change report to the Central Everglades Planning Project, which included the EAA reservoir, which is also a big story that everybody's hearing about. So let's see. DEP is a big partner in these efforts throughout the region, including several task force, the Red Algae and Blue-Green Algae Task Force, the Caloosahatchee Bean Map, and they are part of also the working group for the C43 Water Quality Feasibility Study. They are also leading the efforts on reviewing technologies for water quality treatment, and they have their library that's located on the DEP website.
So I'm curious, how many, is anybody here involved in some of these? Just a show of hands. So obviously we can't, talk about much of this today because we're going to really focus down here in a minute, but at least know that there are people and information when we're done in the cafe that if you're interested in some of these efforts, there will be people and information you can get at the end of the time. So this is a lot of the work that's going on to try to help that flow.
Correct.
Okay.
Did we miss a slide?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. You want to introduce our working group members now that you've...
Well, why not? All right, so you get the idea, and I know a lot of you do work in this area, that there's lots going on to try to restore that flow and restore that precious resource. Today we're going to talk about this study, and we wanted to just frame this out for you and give you the big picture of what this study is about. And really that starts with people. And so the working group is here today that is overseeing this study and the project that goes along with it. And so I'm just going to have them stand right now, just where you are. This is your big moment. This is the moment we talked about. There you go. Look at that. So, and just turn this way, and we'll just start down here, and I'll just give you the mic. But don't talk about your childhood or anything like that. Just your name and the organization you're with, and on we go. These are the people who will also be out in the cafe at the end. Instead of taking public questions in here, we thought it might be better because there's a lot of technical information that you might want to talk about. So all of the working group is going to be out in the cafe afterward to talk to you. They said that they would stay till 11 o'clock tonight. So, I mean, this is good stuff. But maybe for 30 minutes or so, they'll be here. and willing to engage you around questions you might have about the study. So we're just going to just go down the line here, okay?
Good afternoon. My name is Maya Robert. I'm the Environmental Resource Manager for the City of Cape Coral.
Good deal.
Good afternoon. I'm James Evans. I'm the Director of Natural Resources for the City of Sanibel.
Hi, my name's Michael Cook. I am the Assistant District Manager for Lehigh Acres Municipal District.
My name's Shane Parker. I'm the Hendry County Engineer and Public Works Director.
Good afternoon. I'm Roland Ottolini. I'm the Director of Lee County's Division of Natural Resources.
Good afternoon. My name is Alyssa Gilhooly. I'm an environmental specialist with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in a division called the Office of Ecosystem Projects. And along with myself, the director of my division, OEP, is Ed Smith, is also on the working group.
Good afternoon. My name is Ansley Lamar. I'm with the South Florida Water Management District. I'm the Bureau Chief for the State Policy and Coordination Group.
Hello, and thank you for coming. I'm Kim Fikowski. I'm the South Florida Water Management District Project Manager for the study.
I'll take that for you. Thank you, Kurt.
Hi, Kurt Harpelrod, Lee County Natural Resources.
I'm Maria Romero. I'm with Lee County, the Division of Natural Resources, and I'm the Total Maximum Daily Load Coordinator.
And my name is Lisa Krieger. I'm a manager in the Lee County Division of Natural Resources.
Okay, so I can tell you from just sitting with this group for several hours that they're smart and committed. And so they're here also today just to be available to you as well afterward. So, okay, so that's where we start. We start with the people who are helping to lead this study, Georgia, that you're over. How about where the study is going to occur? We know that's the reservoir. We know it's about the reservoir. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know you want to bring up Sean to talk about that. And just to get us into that, tell us what you're trying to do there, the objectives, what is the aim of the study?
Thanks. So the main goal of the study is to identify ways that we can improve water quality, leaving the reservoir and going back to the Caloosahatchee. The reservoir was never designed with an STA or other water quality feature. So we are at this point trying to envision ways that we can improve the water quality coming out of the reservoir. And that is the primary objective. We're going to be evaluating different treatment technologies. We are going to be looking at water coming into the reservoir, if we can treat it before it gets there, treating the water within the reservoir, and also treating the water leaving the reservoir. So we're going to evaluate all three opportunities. We're going to be looking for cost-effective and technically feasible technologies. We are going to consider biological, chemical, and physical water quality treatment, which we're going to hear about some of those opportunities a little bit later in the presentation today. And we want to make sure that whatever we scale down to, or whatever we rely upon at the end of the study, is scalable and available for long-term use. The one underlying item that you have to remember is that the C43 reservoir is a congressionally authorized project, so we're not going to be able to modify or affect operations of the reservoir itself. And that's why I'm going to next bring up Mr. Sean Waldeck. He's also with JTEC. He's the J in JTEC, the Jacobs side. And Sean is the project manager for the C43 reservoir, which is currently under construction. So he gets to spend his days out in a construction trailer off of State Road 80.
And playing on a D10, which is a big dozer. Yeah, I've been working on the C43 reservoir since 2002, and we're finally in construction. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, the reservoir is a 10,500 acre storage reservoir just south of the Caloosahatchee River, and about halfway in between the S78, or otherwise known as the Ortona Lock, and S79, the Franklin Lock. And when the original design was conceived, it was a very simple project, a water storage project. So we took water out of the Caloosahatchee River through the Townsend Canal, labeled here on the map, and the water was stored in the reservoir, and when needed later, would be discharged back out to the Townsend Canal and into the river, and ultimately flowing to the Caloosahatchee estuary. And zooming in a little bit on the reservoir itself, we have what's called S470. It's a big pump station that's currently under construction. It's 1,500 CFS. We'll talk about those details in a minute. That pump station draws water out of the Townsend Canal in the upper left and pumps it into the first of 2 cells in the reservoir itself. The flow of water can go from cell 1 into cell 2 to store, as Drew mentioned, over 170,000 acre feet.
How big is that? How big is the reservoir?
So the reservoir itself is 10,500 acres. So 170,000 acre feet of storage means 1 acre of land, 170,000 feet tall. It's a lot of water. The discharge is similarly simple. It exits the reservoir from 2 locations within the reservoir itself, goes back into a perimeter canal that's going to be constructed as part of the reservoir, and back into the Townsend Canal and ultimately out to the river. So just from an operational perspective, very simply, we fill it during the wet season when we have water in the basin. In the dry season, when the estuary calls for it, we discharge it. We're going to discharge it at around 400 to 500 CFS, which is cubic feet per second. We have the ability to inflow into the reservoir at 1,500 CFS, cubic feet per second. And at that rate, it'd take about 2 months to fill the reservoir. The normal discharge, again, is about 450 to 500 CFS, but we have the ability to discharge for emergencies, if we need to, up to 2,500 CFS.
So Sean, you didn't just start working on this, right?
No.
How long have you been working on this?
So, as I mentioned, since 2002, I was involved in the initial planning stages, and most recently involved in the redesign of the project, and now I've moved out to the field to start construction.
Is there a time frame, a date where you're hoping it's...
Absolutely. We have a contract completion date of 2023, and we're moving.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Okay. All right. So we've got the people in the group. We know what the study is about. We know what it's about and where it's about. But now we wanted you to just know the constraints of the study. And this is important because the constraints put the box around what Georgia and her team are there to do. It's important that you know that because we want this to succeed. And so what is it that you're really trying to do? And one of the ways we know that is by also knowing what we're not trying to do in a study. And that creates good expectation. And we want the community to understand that the study has parameters and it has limitations. And knowing that will basically help us be more successful in getting to the things we really want to know. So what are those? What are the boundaries you're working within?
Well, one of which I already mentioned, which is that we cannot affect the approved C43 reservoir project, the purpose, the infrastructure, the construction schedule, or operation of the reservoir. We have not identified specific project lands for any of the treatment technologies. We will be evaluating land costs when we do our cost-benefit analysis, but we don't have any specific place already predetermined for any of the treatment technologies. We're going to focus on the technologies that have been reviewed by DEP and are existing in their water quality library. We are also going to evaluate other technologies that are relevant and pertinent to treating water quality in this system. The reservoir itself is not going to solve all of the problems of the Caloosahatchee River, so that's just something to keep in mind. We're not going to be able to treat every drop of water coming out of the reservoir or meet any particular standards. So we don't have any targets set for the water quality But we definitely are going to be evaluating all of these technologies to ensure that we are improving the water coming out of the reservoir.
And before you go on, the
Sure.
goal of the study is to identify 3 options.
Right, so we're going to, in our first phase of the project, we're going to do a literature review and a big broad search to try and identify the top 25 technologies. And then from there, we will select the top 10. And from those 10, we will do the cost-benefit analysis on those alternatives and select 3 alternatives at the end of the feasibility study.
And your recommendation is these 3 would be alternatives that are best across a variety of metrics.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And we're going to talk about some of those metrics a little bit later on.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. So people, what is the aim of the study? You know that now. Where is this really located? We're talking about the C43 reservoir, and we know what the boundaries are. We know what the frame of the study is. So now we want to get a little bit deeper into what the study is going to look at, and we're going to bring up some experts to help walk through some of that, and I'm going to let you introduce them, just so that people can locate who they are, and then they can talk about what they're going to do.
Yeah, so let's see, we'll go to the focusing on the study. So with us today, we have some of our technical experts. The first that's going to speak today is Jim Bays. If you want to come up, Jim. Jim Bays is with Jacobs Engineering, and he's been working on alternative water quality treatment technologies for a while, a few years. And then the other expert we have today is Chris Keller. You can come up too. Chris Keller is with Wetland Solutions, Inc., and he's going to be talking to us about wetland treatment systems and stormwater treatment areas. So,
all right, shall I start?
Pass that over to you.
Okay. So I'm going to provide an overview of the types of technologies that we're looking at as part of the preliminary assessment. We broadly categorize them as biological, chemical, and physical approaches. I'm going to focus on a general view and dig down a little bit on the chemical and physical side of things. Chris is going to talk in greater detail about the use of wetlands and natural systems, but I want to provide an overview. So what are we trying to treat? What we really want to focus on are those constituents as they might leave the reservoir and how they might affect the downstream river and estuary. So normally in these kind of contexts, we think about nitrogen. We think about organic nitrogen or components of that are biologically available, and dissolved inorganic nitrogen. Typically that's an ammonia or nitrate oxidized forms. This is the general suite of nitrogen the types that are out there. All of them in excess can lead to water quality issues. Our mission here is to make sure that the concept of the technology that's selected would improve the quality coming out of the reservoir. In addition to that, we're also looking at phosphorus. This has been, of course, the main thrust of the stormwater treatment area construction and management by the district over the last 25 years. It affects estuaries as well, and so we want to make sure we have systems in place or in mind that will improve the phosphorus content. And finally, we think about suspended solids. That can look like algae or suspended biological matter, but this also can be stores of nitrogen or phosphorus that ultimately contribute to water quality concerns downstream. So all these things are the kind of things we want our technologies to address. So as Georgia said, we are approaching this with a very broad view of the technologies. Shown here is a cross-section of more or less as I see it, as the spectrum of technologies, whether it runs the gamut from a natural treatment, where we use wetlands or other natural systems, to more conventional and engineered approaches, using such as chemical and physical treatment. But the inherent advantages of natural systems are that they use natural energies, natural microbial communities to provide the treatment that we would otherwise have to energize or put in concrete or steel tanks and create infrastructure that we would do in an engineered approach. They may integrate, they may be hybrids, and may be complementary, but all of them lead to the same goal of water treatment. Natural systems might require less operational effort over time and cost, but they may have a much larger land footprint requirement Engineered technologies may be very effective, but they may, and have a very small footprint, but they may also cost a lot to build and operate. So these are the things we want to look at broadly as we go forward and try to find the best ranked approaches. So conceptually, we're looking at this project as a treatment of water either going into the reservoir or in the reservoir or coming out of the reservoir. Obviously, we want to control the water quality coming out of the reservoir, but there are opportunities when you load the reservoir to possibly to treat that and improve that, and also in the reservoir itself because you're storing it for so much time. So we think in terms of like a menu of technologies that might be applicable to that inflow in the reservoir or out of the reservoir. As Sean's highlighted in his overview, this is the mechanics and operational requirements to move that water in and out and feed it through a treatment system are involved. So we're not there yet. We're just simply trying to find the technologies that might be suitable. So I'm going to kind of walk through a range of physical and chemical approaches that are, as I say, somewhat generically on our list that we're looking at. There are a number of ways of doing this, and so I'm kind of trying to stay at a certain altitude to kind of cover the ground, and then we'll wrap it up with more details from Chris. So starting off, though, one of the simplest ways of improving water quality, and has been for thousands of years, has been filtering the water through a media. That could be sand, it could be other forms of enhanced or treated media, but the idea is you're separating the particles that you're trying to remove simply by impact on the void spaces and impact on the gravel and the media that we're putting the water through, coming out with a highly clarified water. There are very large sand filters in place and in operation now in Florida. It's not inconceivable to think about a large system that could treat the water coming in or out of the reservoir. But the purpose here is that it separates the algae, separates the nutrients that are bound up in the algae as well. And even in the sand filter itself, there's a treatment process that can assimilate and transform some of those nutrients to less problematic forms. Taking the idea of filtration further to the more modern approach, where we might think about a membrane separation, where we basically are forcing the water under pressure through a very porous membrane, very small pores, to separate out the large particles from the small particles, separate out the nutrients from the water we're trying to convey. So this is a standard approach that we take for drinking water supply throughout the country, and also for wastewater treatment as well. But you can see the general form of these things they're not big ponds, they're highly compressed, highly condensed facilities with tanks, buildings, power, chemical storage, and the conveyance.
Can you just stop there for just a minute? So,
yeah,
George,
sure.
I wanted to ask you something. So this goes back to one of the constraints, right? If you recommended something like that, there's no land already designated for something like that.
Right, so certainly Certainly, the size of the facility is going to also come into play when we are evaluating our technologies.
Okay, so small facility, high power, but maybe involved.
Yeah.
So we take that idea of physical separation, and then we add the idea of adding chemicals to it. That is, what we want to consider with chemicals is that are the particles of water that we're trying to remove, the nutrients, the particles, suspended matter, they all have an electrical charge. That charge keeps them in suspension in the water. The process of coagulation neutralizes that charge by adding a chemical compound to that. Sometimes that's an aluminum or an iron compound. It's a very common process for water quality improvement for drinking water, for example. But the other steps involved with that typically include flocculation, where we encourage that those particles that we've now neutralized to stick together and to create larger particles to then settle out and create a sludge or a waste that has to be removed. That sedimentation process typically happens in large clarifiers or large basins. Sometimes we add a chemical called an adsorbent, which actually creates a surface for that nutrient or pollutant to attach to, and then we remove that material from the water itself. So this is a highly advanced approach to treating water, and it's done commonly. It also requires the same kind of facilities that we just mentioned for the other type. The district has done a great deal of research in the past looking at the wide range of approaches and chemicals to look at for treating phosphorus. A study a few years ago identified a range of different compounds. They include, they can be comprised of aluminum or iron or other constituents, synthetic compounds, but they can be very effective. And this is the thing, we have a lot of flow, we have a certain limited amount of time, we have water quality objectives that'll have to be met, it may be a feasible alternative. So we need to look at that technology. When you build these things, you have to create a zone for rapid mixing of the chemical, and then another zone for more of a gentle flocculation and blending of the particles, and an area for solid settling and separation in a clarifier. So they are typically large plants and have this kind of approach and design. But you can step back from some of that complexity a little bit with some of these compounds and build a lagoon-based type of system like exists right now up in Lake County, which is treating water from the Beauclair Canal before it goes down to the downstream lakes. And this has been effective now for several years, and it treats phosphorus substantially and also removes other particulate forms. So the idea is that the compound is added to the lagoons, settles out, lagoons get cleaned out periodically. But that speaks to the issue that using this approach, you're really generating a waste residual that then has to be managed that maybe is just as much of an effort as the water management, if not more. Another approach that's gained application in the last 10 years is the use of electrocoagulation. Here, instead of adding a chemical, we're adding an electrical charge to the water. And through metal plates designed as either anodes or cathodes. And what that electrical charge does is it tackles that same issue of neutralizing the particle charge and encouraging it to settle and coagulate and sediment out. So that creates a sludge, but it also creates less sludge because you're not adding the chemicals, and it provides a very effective way to control water quality and without the additional as much waste residuals, and is a very direct and operable system. So generally speaking, there's another branch of technology, the biological approaches using wetlands, or it can be ponds with floating wetlands. These are all things that have been built in Florida. All of them could be conceivably built as a pre or post treatment system for treating water. But what about water in the reservoir itself? It's going to sit there for several months. We want to manage that. Well, this is a common issue with drinking water quality reservoirs. So like in Tampa Bay, they add air. There's an aeration system that helps keep that air, it keeps that water column turned over. It makes the algae hard to establish their blooms. And it actually helps manage the water quality by keeping nutrients out of suspension and out of the water. But we can also directly manage that by adding alum compounds or other constituents to neutralize and then coagulate and settle out the particles of nitrogen or phosphorus in the reservoir itself. Sometimes in reservoirs, we attack the algae itself as the issue. So ultrasonics have gained acceptance in recent years as a way to control algae. It disrupts the internal workings of an algal cell so it doesn't rise and fall as well, and it tends to settle, and then increases that sedimentation rate. It doesn't hurt other organisms. Or we could just add algicides, a very common approach for small ponds, small lakes, but difficult to do perhaps on a 10,000 acre reservoir. So we're trying to keep an open mind here and say, what are the various technologies, knowing that we're dealing with a very large system. So the DEP over the last 10, 20 years or so has been compiling a list of accepted technologies. Vendors have brought their material to the district, the DEP. The DEP has reviewed those and determined that they can be applied in Florida. And there's about 27 listed now on the state's web page. That includes a broad category, the same categories that I've described here, absorption, filtration type approaches, coagulation compounds. They're all there for us to sort of pick through and take a look at and see if they're applicable here to this project. So we're going to look at all of them. What's nice is that it's been compiled and we have a starting point. So once we understand that, we have all these technologies, we have to really decide how to evaluate them. What are we looking to separate their performance? So we're thinking in general terms about its nutrient removal performance. We have to certainly make sure that it effectively removes nitrogen or phosphorus in these cases with proven results. We are looking for technologies and examples and approaches that have been shown to work in Florida with our unique waters that we have, and that they can't cause harm. We can't make a worse problem out of this than what we're attempting to treat here. So we have to make sure that we're not adding a constituent or causing an adverse effect by providing a treatment. Well, the cost of that approach has to be evaluated. The unit cost, how much it takes to achieve a certain level of phosphorus or nitrogen reduction. These are provides a yardstick for comparing different technologies readily. The physical requirements. Large wetlands may require large areas. We may require a certain amount of power or other constituents for the engineered approaches. So we need to be able to address the cost factors here. Finally, what I would generally categorize as administrative. Are these regulatory acceptable? What are the monitoring requirements? What are the general support requirements needed to operate these technologies? The next steps for us on this part is to dive in this research, compile the information from the websites, from our experience, from the contributions and information brought forth by the vendors and folks who are in the business of treating water. Evaluate that data, provide a preliminary ranking. Like Georgia said, we're going to come up with a 25 short list and reduce that down further to a 10 short list and ultimately get to a 3 short list. And so there's a bit of a cycles of analysis that's going to go on through each stage and develop some recommendations built around that. So maybe more than you needed to know, but that's a lot in a hurry there.
Nice job.
Thanks, Jim. He's squeezing so hard to open that. All right.
All right, as Jim mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the natural treatment system options that are out there. Folks that are very familiar with the wide range of water quantity and quality issues probably already know that there's lots of work that's been done in this southern part of the state here with respect to natural treatment systems, so some of this may be nothing new. Our graphic of the wetland water quality processes occur a little bit simpler than Jim's in that I can shove it all on one slide and not have too many for you to look at. But the key message here is that those same processes, many of those same physical and chemical and biological processes that Jim talked about happening in settling basins or in coagulation systems or in filters occur through natural processes in treatment wetlands, stormwater treatment areas, however you'd like to refer to them, natural treatment systems. So a couple of those processes that we'll highlight are shown on this slide here. One is photolysis, which right here, this guy. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun shines down on the water and starts to break apart some of the chemicals that are in the water that are maybe the contributors to downstream water quality problems. So by breaking longer chain molecules into smaller pieces, you then make those pieces available for other processes that occur in the wetland to deal with effectively. Sedimentation. Jim talked about this one here. These wetland systems, and this is one of the potential disadvantages, is the larger land area that's required. But you're spreading the water out. It's moving very slowly and uniformly through that system, which means that any kind of particle with any type of density at all has the opportunity to settle. So that material, whether it's just physically dropping out in the water as that slow water's moving through there, or if it's impacting on the stems of the vegetation in the system, getting trapped in the biofilms, there's a variety of sedimentation processes that are very natural and helpful that occur in these systems. Jim talked about precipitation. I'll touch on that one a little bit more in another slide, but other compounds can be formed within wetlands under certain conditions that then settle out and drop to the bottom of the system and are stored there. For some of the dissolved substances, and again, we'll look at this in a little more detail in a moment, there's diffusion through the sediment surface into biofilms, direct uptake by the plants. There's a cycling of nutrients that occur in these natural treatment systems that also help to reduce downstream concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, and some of these other parameters that we're concerned with. And then there's also these various biodegradation transformation processes that occur. There's adsorption. There's a large sediment surface area that under certain conditions may, Jim mentioned adsorption in his discussion as well. Particles or dissolved substances can bond to those surfaces and get trapped there. And for some parameters, there's also a transfer from the water column to the atmosphere that occurs through a process called volatilization. So this is what everybody will be quizzed on when you leave out the back door this afternoon, is the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle. And this got a little scrunched, and there's mysterious ends all over the place here, but a lot of the nitrogen that enters our natural systems in Florida, both the pristine ones and the impacted systems, is fixed from the atmosphere. Everybody in the room already knows that the atmosphere is 79% nitrogen, so it's no big surprise that we get a lot coming in here. But we also get nitrogen coming into our watersheds from agricultural fertilizers, urban runoff, from atmospheric deposition, from power plant combustion processes and industrial processes. There's no shortage of this material coming to us. The great thing about the natural treatment systems is that they deal with nitrogen very effectively. And they can deal with nitrogen almost regardless of the form that it comes in. So something like ammonia gets taken up as a nutrient for plant growth or bacterial growth, microbial growth in the system. Parameters you'll hear a lot about. I live up in the Gainesville area where the hot issue is nitrate and changes in springs water quality. Everybody's concerned about nitrate up there. That's coming primarily in that region from agricultural fertilizer operations. Nitrate is very effectively removed in wetlands because the oxygen concentrations are low. There's plenty of available carbon there to make all the little bugs that live in the sediment surface and in the biofilms happy. And they use this as an energy source and very efficiently convert nitrate into nitrogen gas, which then diffuses out of the water column and leaves the water completely to the atmosphere. One of the big focuses in this particular watershed is organic nitrogen. For those that know the details of the TMDL for the estuary was very challenging to achieve just by focusing on the inorganic nitrogen parameters, ammonia and nitrate and a few other forms, which requires whatever treatment process goes in that's going to make an ultimate difference downstream to be able to really effectively do something with the dissolved organic nitrogen. So we'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. Phosphorus cycle is equally complex, maybe even more complex than the nitrogen cycle. But the great thing and the take-home message here is that these large natural systems are also very effective at removing phosphorus from the water column. I mentioned precipitation on an earlier slide. Certain types of wetlands under some conditions, particularly those that have a lot of surface area of plants within the water column, get very high pH concentrations during the daytime. When there's available calcium in the water, you get a physical, it's not really shown here, maybe over here, a physical, what's the word I'm looking for? Coagulation and precipitation of calcium phosphate. So much like Jim was talking about adding a chemical and getting something to stick to something else and then have it drop out in the system, we see those same types of things occurring in wetlands under specialized conditions. The main removal of phosphorus in natural treatment systems is the uptake of the dissolved fractions into the plant, and then this piece here, the gradual decomposition and turnover of that vegetation as it dies and creates new sediments on the bottom of the wetland system. So it's mostly a storage of phosphorus in the bottom of the wetland. There are many different types of treatment wetlands, natural treatment systems that have been evaluated in South Florida over the last several decades and around the world over a longer period of time. The floating aquatic vegetation systems are here, emergent plants, submerged aquatic vegetation. This is the one where we see the really interesting calcium phosphate stuff occurring, as well as here with the Periphyton, which is an attached algal community that grows under kind of nutrient poor conditions generally, and you see this fuzzy algal community growing attached to stems of plants and covering the bottom of the surface of the wetland. So we'll look at all these types as we go through the feasibility study and evaluate their various effectiveness for achieving the project goals. As you probably got from Jim's presentation, the technologies that he'll be looking at primarily are very engineered. A lot of people may look at a natural treatment system and think, well, that's just a cool looking green magic box that does something. But it's also, for some nerdy people like so, is also very engineered. We study how those reactions occur, why they occur, under what conditions they occur, and build models and tools to allow us to appropriately size natural treatment systems to achieve specific goals based on the flows and incoming concentrations. I'm going to go over a couple projects that have been done in the watershed in the past and show you what the relevance is and how we'll use this information going forward. This is tiny, tiny, tiny little 5-acre reservoir cells within the footprint of Sean's 170,000 acre-foot reservoir that really aren't even there anymore because he already drove his bulldozer over them. But we studied the water quality in those cells for a period of a year, about a decade ago. And those data are summarized here. And what was interesting to find was in pumping water out of the canal system and storing it in the reservoir for that year's length of time, we actually saw nutrient concentration decreases occurring in those systems without any other intervention. So that's just through natural nutrient cycling in there with the microbial communities that were there. There were not really any plant communities there to do any work, so that's algae, and then physical settling processes that are occurring to reduce phosphorus quite nicely by about 74%, but also to take an appreciable dent out of the incoming nitrogen concentration. So that's encouraging. It means that the reservoir isn't necessarily just going to make things worse on its own. It may actually make things quite a bit better. A more recent study is one that we worked on with the JTEC folks here and the Water Management District, where we looked at specific wetland plant communities, the emergent plants, which you see sticking out of some of these tanks, and these darker ones that are a little deeper were the submerged aquatic plants. We studied those over a period of about 2.5 years to look at how they perform, specifically focusing on the dissolved organic nitrogen question. That study was recently completed and is available from the district. And there were 3 specific objectives that we were focused on during that project, 3 questions that we were trying to answer. The first one is, out of the emergent plant community and the submerged aquatic vegetation plant community, was one better than the other for reducing the dissolved organic nitrogen concentrations and for reducing total nitrogen? Are there concerns, and this comes into where you would cite one of these projects, about the antecedent soil conditions? Is there something in the soils that maybe have been farmed or are maybe rich in organic matter or not that leads to feedback in that system that reduces the ability of that system to achieve very low nitrogen concentrations? And then the third question was, how fast, how hard can we operate these things and still get the kind of water quality improvement that we want? So those were the 3 primary questions of the study. And the results are coming up here one by one. What we saw for total nitrogen was a reduction in concentration across all of those mesocosm systems of about 23%. And when we looked at that in terms of a mass basis, because there are some water accounting things that go along with that, it's even better. It was about 33% reduction in total nitrogen. I mentioned earlier that the primary source of nitrogen in the Caloosahatchee is dissolved organic nitrogen. During the study, it comprised about 68% of the total nitrogen that was there. And what we found is that we got really good reduction in dissolved organic nitrogen in those systems during the wet season, more so than in the dry season. And you see those numbers there. We found further that some of the dissolved organic nitrogen, which is generally thought to be very difficult to break down, was actually converted into forms of nitrogen that were then more readily assimilated in the system. So we saw a positive change there, moving from dissolved organic nitrogen into inorganic forms that were then processed and completely removed from the system. So that was an encouraging result. The inorganic nitrogen, I mentioned earlier that I think that those were pretty effectively removed in wetlands. That was better than 90% for those ammonia and nitrate fractions that come down the river. And what we didn't find was a big difference between those 2 plant communities. So going forward through the feasibility study, what we'll look at for total nitrogen reduction is that maybe a mixed community system would be the right type of large-scale natural treatment system to consider for the reservoir project. However, supporting years of data that the district has collected in the Everglades agricultural area and south, we did find a much better removal of total phosphorus in the submerged aquatic plant communities than in the emergent. So Jim summarized what they were going to do going forward with respect to all the conventional technologies. What we're going to do is take a deeper look into these past studies that have been conducted in this watershed. We're fortunate that we've got this working group with local governments that have constructed many natural systems, treatment system projects of their own, that we will mine those data and pull that into the analysis and look at that and really be able to get a robust look at how natural treatment systems might be applicable to this project going forward. And similar with the conventional technologies, we'll look at conceptual plans, cost estimates, how much land is required to achieve project objectives, and move on from there.
Good deal. Does the quiz happen now, or?
It depends. It's going to be kind of a pop quiz.
A pop quiz, okay, all right.
Randomly selected audience.
Well, thank you. I mean, you can see we have smart people working on this. What's next, George? As the project leader, we've looked a little bit about the big pieces of what the study is about, what the governor really gave as a mandate, what you're going to be looking at. So the team, what are the next steps for all of you?
Right, so we have a lot of work to do. What I didn't mention earlier is we have a deadline of 18 months to finish the study. We kicked it off officially in July, so we've already burned a few months up. So our draft data collection report, which is basically going to be a literature review where we evaluate treatment technologies and identify the top 25. That draft study will be out in March of 2020. Between now and then, we do have another public meeting in January where we'll be again looking for feedback and opportunities to be included in our feasibility study. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to whittle down those 25 to 10 technologies that we're going to evaluate and do a cost-benefit analysis on. And that draft feasibility study is due in August of 2020, with the final coming out in October, and we'll do a final presentation on our results in November. So that's our upcoming schedule. Again, we do have 3 other public meetings planned throughout this process where we'll be meeting with the public and interested parties to discuss opportunities we can improve water quality for the reservoir. Those are listed here, and the Water Management District has a website that's linked from their main page, because I don't know if you'll be able to write down all of those words. But from their main page, sfwmd.gov, you can get to the working group's webpage. We have a lot of the studies that we've collected already on that website. We have future meeting dates listed there, and we also have our work plan and how we plan to really perform this effort over the next 18 months, 16 months.
And I believe this is being recorded today.
Mm-hmm.
That will also be on the website, yes? So if you want to refer back to our time today, you can do that also at the website. So, okay, it's your turn. It's your turn to engage, to talk, to ask questions. We're going to do this a little bit differently because we've got such a great space here at the Collaboratory. Instead of taking one-on-one questions, we're going to ask the study group, why don't you just go ahead and go now, group, out to the cafe, because we've got this great space. And we all are coming at this from different angles, so instead of just one by one asking questions that maybe only 3 of you want to hear about, this gives you the opportunity to really go and talk to either the experts or the people who are most focused on the things you want to talk about. And so they decided they would rather interact with you in a much more intimate way, one-on-one, small groups. And we've got the building for the rest of this time. And so we're not in any hurry. We can stay. The meeting was for 2 hours, so we really want this to be an important part of the conversation where we get to have dialogue with the working group. So we wanted to try to be done a little before 3, and look at that. We made it. So please stay. Please ask questions. And there's information out in the lobby for you to take with you on this or other studies. And thank you for being here.
You guys are supposed to go too. Okay. They're going.